this is a common point of contention with early implementations and with the sales process within an organization. It is our recommendation, and I strongly believe this to be true, that your business glossary names must be unique. Okay, and if you think about the purpose of your business glossary, is that you are this is your point of reference. So if someone says, "Hey, I've got a report of employees by the original hire date," and someone said, "Well, what do you mean by original hire date?" If you go look at your glossary and look up employee original hire date, and you see that you have two different definitions of an employee original hire date, like, that's not helpful, right? The point of the glossary is to say, this is like, I'm using this term in communicating around my data, and I'm using it very specifically and very intentionally. And if we go look it up, you'll get clarity on what that means, and it can be only one definition, right? But you have the power of like context and specificity to help you. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So a couple of best practices here around names. First of all, the name should be as specific as possible. So if you have a name like start date, that's not very good, because frankly, it's going to immediately eliminate your ability to have, to not have more than one of the same definition. Or, you can't have, there's many things that have a start date, right? So having the specificity like, oh, we have what's my employee start date? And that might be good, but if you want to be even more specific, you want employee original hire date, right? So that's like if someone started and then they left and then they came back and they went on leave, like what's the start date for that person? So having that specificity is there. So if you're just using the term start date, and you've got an entry in your glossary that has three different definitions, it is not helpful. You want to make sure you know which one that is. Secondly, and this is goes back to like the difference between functional and technical, is that you want to have no data system or database specific names in your glossary. I mean, the one exception is if you're actually literally talking about, the name of your database or whatever. But this is the point being is that these are business terms. So what the employee original hire date is a thing that that you want to document in reports and talk about. If the easy way to think about this is if, imagine that tomorrow you're going to change whatever data system that you're currently using. Is this definition going to change, right? Your business definition of how you talk about employee hire date shouldn't change if you change HR systems, right? Now maybe where that lives is going to change. So avoid things like this is called the EMPL ID and or the EMPL hire date or whatever, that cause problems. Kind of related to that, it's favorite common names are applicable. So remember, this is a functional facing thing. So if you want to avoid, this is something where people are going to sort of do searching and discovery. Do we have a definition for this? Does it exist? And common language kind of searching for it. And if you've got something in there that's called like FKZ2 code 7, like, all right, that's not really helpful. Even if you've got a really beautiful explanation of what that means, if it really stands for some special status for employees, call it that. You can, if you've got special like abbreviations and codes for things, I highly recommend, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, having synonyms or common names as attributes of your definition, so that if for either searching or discovery, if someone's looking for employee original hire date, you might have like a common name of start date or common or like that, so that's discoverable in a search, right? But the actual name of it should be very specific. Right, and lastly, and I should have just put this as the first bullet, like the name must be unique across all glossary names. Yes, really. And where we get the most pushback on that is from people who have not yet bought into the idea that the glossary is functional, and that because they're like, well, we have an ID in our PeopleSoft system, and we've got a different ID in our Microsoft system, and we have a different ID, and they're all called ID. And I was like, well, that's great that they're called IDs in the database, but that's not what you want to call it in the glossary. Like, you can have those names in your data model and data catalog, but in the glossary, you need to decide I have something called employee ID, that is that in that HR system, it's in this field and whatever. So that's really important concept. Last thing we'll talk about this in more detail as well is just this concept of including relevant context and or source in the name. So if there is sort of different definitions, like, that you may commonly refer to as salary. Someone says, hey, what's my salary? Or what's that person's salary? That you can have a definition for that or context for that that's just around like, oh, what's my base salary, or what's the base salary for a new employer or for a position or whatever. That's a very different number than what your United States federal IRS annual taxable income is, right? Has a whole bunch of logic and context to it. But someone might use these two terms interchangeably. So just including the context in the name creates that level of specificity.